Ready to look and feel your best? Welcome to Transform Belleza, your go-to for body sculpting, facials, skin tightening, weight loss, and injectables. Find us in East Hanover, New Jersey, or call today.
Evolve Nutrition, 110 Route 10, East Hanover, New Jersey. Evolve Nutrition, EHNJ.shop, 973-647-4625. Evolve Nutrition has all your favorite supplements and vitamins, health and wellness products, fresh meals, protein snacks, gym apparel, and accessories. They will ship to all 50 states. If you don't see a product that you want on their website, just give them a call, 973-647-4625, or message them on Instagram. Tell them what you want. They will order for you, and they will ship it to you to any state in the country. But the best part is 20% off with this discount code SS20. Or when you call them, just tell them to show the commercial on Serious in Selling This Bodybuilding. Evolve Nutrition, 110 Route 10, East Hanover, New Jersey. The website, www.evolvenutritionehnj.shop, 973-647-4625. And don't forget the discount code SS20 for 20% off your favorite products. All right, Serious Selling This Outcast. We have a return guest because last time it was awesome, so this time should be even better. Ron Chepesiuk. What's up, Ron?
Hey, man. What's happening?
Not bad, not bad. Listen, before we get started, Ron, I actually watched the documentary on HBO.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, the bus driver.
Yeah, did you like it?
Yeah, I did like it because what was really interesting to me is like he didn't have the same demeanor of a normal drug dealer. He didn't seem to have that killer instinct. Like from the outside looking in, he just seems like a nice guy.
Yeah, well, what you saw is what you get. I mean, that's the way he is in real life.
Meanwhile, he's like
he's
the
very
mastermind.
like I explained in the documentary, he's very gentle, very considerate, very polite, and yeah, he's the most atypical. The guy we're going to talk about today, Ike Atkinson, is very similar to him. These two could have been brothers. I mean, their demeanor and the way they approached crime and everything is just really amazing.
Okay, so if you guys haven't seen the documentary we're talking about, it's called The Bus Driver.
Give the second part of it because it's sometimes hard to pick up. The Britain's Cocaine King.
Yeah, it's Bus Driver, Britain's Cocaine King, and it's about the biggest cocaine distributor in the UK. And it was really fascinating because the longest time the guy held a job as a bus driver while he was the biggest distributor of cocaine in the UK.
Yeah.
Which is really, really, it was really a fascinating documentary. So if you guys haven't seen it, it's on HBO Max. Go and watch it.
Yeah.
All right. So today we're actually going to be talking about a guy by the name of Ike Atkinson. Here's the book that you wrote, Sgt Smack. And apparently, if you guys are a fan of the Denzel Washington movie, the original, no, American Gangster. I'm sorry, American Gangster. The movie is apparently 95% bullshit, which most people don't know. Apparently, smuggling drugs through, corpses in caskets from Vietnam was bullshit.
Yeah.
And him masterminding the plan, Frank Lucas masterminding the plan from Bangkok to the United States is also bullshit because that was this guy.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little about that? Because apparently you met him and he seemed to be, from what you had told me last time, he seemed to be a little pissed that Frank Lucas was getting the credit.
Yeah. It's really interesting that you would say that I think it's the biggest hoax in the history of international drug trafficking. The fact that Lucas tried to claim that he shipped drugs to the U.S. From Asia via the Vietnam War, corpses, coffins, and all that stuff on that then. But I mean, Ike was a well-kept secret. He's probably the biggest American drug trafficker ever to come out of Asia. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know anything about him. And I was working on a project on Lucas, and I was on the internet, and I kept running to this guy called Sgt Smack. And so I looked him up, and it was Ike Atkinson. And I said, I wonder where this guy is right now. I mean, maybe he's still alive. And I checked him down, and I found out he's been in prison for since 1976, and this was like 2007.
Right.
So he was in prison for 30 years. And then I said, well, he must have talked to somebody. And I looked, and he hadn't talked to anybody on that then. And then I said, well, where is this guy? So I looked him up, and he was at Butler Correctional Institution, prison, in about 3 hours from me. So the guy's close to me, right? Mm-hmm. And, easy to travel, easy to visit. And I said, I wonder if this guy would talk to me. And so I wrote a note to the warden and asked him if I could talk to Leslie Ike Atkinson and all that. So he passed the note on to Ike, and he hadn't given an interview since he was in prison, 70. Mm-hmm. So he didn't give an interview to anybody. But for some reason, he decided to talk to me. And I found out later the reason he wanted to talk to me, in my letter to him, I mentioned that I would try to correct the story of how drugs were shipped to the U.S. from Asia. Right. On that day. And he'd been trying to clear his name because he got associated with this thing here, and he didn't like it at all because right. He was an honorable military guy. We'll talk about that later. But, he was a former master sergeant in the military and all that. And so I ended up going down to Butler. Now, ironically, this is really funny. It shows you how fate sometimes, makes its way into situations you least expected. The warden was a new warden. He had just been there 3 months, and he didn't know the policy was not to grant interviews.
Really?
Yeah. So, he could easily just turn me down, but
right.
But he didn't know his own policy. And when I got there, he told me that. He says, "You're here because I made a mistake." He says, I shouldn't, but he said, "You're here, so we'll go ahead." So I went in there, and Ike comes in, and he has his orange prison's outfit, and he comes bouncing in, and really charismatic guy. And so we sat there, and I explained to him what I knew about Lucas and his story. And I said, if you work with me, I'll try to get your story straight. And he said, yeah. He said, but I'm in here for another year or so. So he ended up getting out just when American Gangster movie was coming out.
Oh.
In 2007. It was almost a day. It was really ironic.
Yeah.
And so he came out, and he's in the movie. The character Nate, who's supposedly Ike's cousin. Lucas claimed to be his cousin, and that made Ike go ballistic because he said he wasn't related to him. Yeah. But he was supposed to be Ike's cousin, and he was in Asia, and he's the guy walking around, Nate, in the uniform, the military uniform.
Yeah, I know. I know the scene.
Yeah. What the hell is a guy doing walking around in Bangkok with a U.S. military uniform, right?
Yeah.
On that then. So he was really upset about that, and so he told me his story, and we decided that we worked. I ended up becoming really good friends with him, almost best friends, and he'd come down to my house and all that, and him and my wife got along really well, and he told the story, and then we published it, and it shocked a lot of people because nobody knew anything about Ike Atkinson, and they didn't know his relationship with Frank Lucas. But that's how his story got started.
It is. Before we get into Ike Atkinson and Frank Lucas, it is my pet peeve. I hate when Hollywood just changes stuff and makes stuff up, because there's so many great stories that you could just tell from the organized crime world, and if you just tell the story, it's good enough. And I don't know why they have to change things and make it just it's a basic lie. And yeah. if doing this channel that I do, and interviewing guys like you, and interviewing former mob figures and 1% bikers, and the list goes on. The stories Hollywood can make that are real, and they just it drives me crazy. I don't understand.
Well, I could tell you how the story started on that.
Okay.
It started with the 2000 year article in the New York Magazine written by a guy named Mark Jacobson. And Jacobson was looking for a story. He was a staff writer, very good writer, by the way. He found out this guy named Frank Lucas, who was supposed to have been a big drug dealer back in the late 60s, early 70s and all that. So he arranged an interview with him. And Lucas was struggling at the time. He was on welfare, in fact. Nobody knew anything about him. So he sat down for the interview. And you can see when you read the article that Lucas started to play the journalist, and he started to make up these incredible stories, about him in Southeast Asia, right, meeting a big drug lord, down in the Golden Triangle. That's the major cocaine producing area of the world, probably the biggest. Mm-hmm. And he just got more fantastical. And you can see what Lucas was doing. He realized that it was an article, so it maybe had a lifespan of 3 months or so, right? And then everybody would forget about it. Right. But in the meantime, you'd have a big reputation, from the article. And but two producers in Hollywood, Glazer and Ridley Scott, read the article and were enthralled by it. They said, "Hey, man, this is a Hollywood movie, incredible." And so they contacted Lucas, and they signed him up. And of course, Richie Roberts was a big, he was played with Russell Crowe in the movie, was a big part of that, and they signed him as well on that. And so Lucas was stuck with the story. Yeah. That is the story. He couldn't modify it, and all that. And so, like most conspiracy theories now, we're in the age of Trump. You see what happens with conspiracy theories. They got bigger and bigger. Oh, yeah. When I researched this article, when I researched this subject, I looked on the internet. There was like 12,000 articles. All of them said Lucas transported drugs from Asia using the cadavers and coffins of U.S. servicemen and all that. And nobody questioned it on that. And so, he was stuck with the story. And like Pinocchio with his nose, it kept growing.
It's unbelievable because it literally took me 10 minutes to Google.
well, yeah, you're right. And you read my book. Yeah. I have 2 chapters there where I demolish the theory. Good. I mean, it's so absurd. It really is. It really to ship. When he had so many other ways, like Ike said, he said, I had so many other good ways to ship drugs. Why would I want to use the corpses? And it's dangerous. You're dealing with formaldehyde. Yeah, you get into the corpses and you die.
Oh God, I didn't even think of that. Yeah. He I wrote down. I took some notes from when I was reading your book, and I wrote down the ways that he actually smuggled the drugs, and it was let's see, bored out holes in furniture.
Yeah. Teak furniture.
Yeah. Actual military men in their duffel bags. Yeah. And the U.S. Army Post Office.
Yeah, exactly. Those are the three major ways. He started off by using soldiers. He had a bar named Jack's American Star Bar, which he organized with a couple other buddies, Herman Jackson, Jimmy Smedley, and Chai Rubawat, who was their Asian connection. And he had the connection to the Golden Triangle, right? That was the secret of Ike's success, is he had a source, and that was the Golden Triangle. He had the guy, and China White was like the most purest form of heroin around. Everybody wanted that. And in the movie, Lucas says, blue magic, right? Blue magic. Right, it's a big thing. That's all that was Ike's China White.
Really?
Yeah, right. It was the same drug, on that, but it was a big deal, like he had this source with this magic drug and all that. Then, so they had this drug, and it just it's just amazing.
Yeah, let's it's a pet peeve of mine. I can't stand when Hollywood lies, or because the movies are good, the stories itself are good enough. Like, just don't change the story.
Well, also the screenwriter didn't have a clue about drug trafficking, especially in Asia on that. Then, like, for example, in the movie, he has Frank Lucas going down into the Golden Triangle. Imagine that. Yeah. To meet with this kingpin Asian drug lord, and that was based on Kun Sa. who is one of the biggest heroin dealers of all time on that then. But first of all, who the hell would go down into the middle of the jungle?
Yeah.
But the danger of that. Okay. And number two, what heroin dealer gives up his source?
Yeah, right.
Why would I give up his source? I mean, he wouldn't give anybody his source because he had the secret of his success,
right?
And how he was transporting drugs. So both of that was absurd. And if the screenwriter knew a little bit about the drug trade, he would have known that.
All you gotta do is still do a little research, man. But
yeah.
All right, so let's go down for people who don't know. Let's break down from the beginning who Ike Atkinson was and how he got started in the drug trafficking business.
Right. Yeah, he was born in 1919 in Goldsboro, a small town in North Carolina. Had a pretty normal childhood. And it was loving family and all that. No crime involved. And he joined the military. He actually lied about his age. He got in when he was 17 in 1942. And, this is an age when there was segregation, right, in the military on that. But Ike had the ability to rise to master sergeant, which doesn't seem like much, but in those days it was amazing.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because blacks didn't rise in the military at all because of segregation. So he was a master sergeant, and he was a gambler too, incredibly successful gambler. In fact, if Ike never got involved in the drug trade, he probably would have been rich anyways because of his gambling on that then. And so he made enough money in the military, something like $60,000 to buy himself a house when he got out on that then. And he ended up traveling and gambling. There's big poker games all over the world, and he would travel. He'd find out about them, and he would travel and play them. And at this point, he never had any interest in the drug trade, but he had a friend from the military, a guy named Herman Jackson, and Jack was they were a good partnership. Jackson would smell opportunity, and Ike would make it a reality. He knew how to implement it. He's a brilliant guy, mm-hmm. But Jackson saw opportunity, and one day, about 1968 or so, he was going to Korea to see a friend, and he stopped off in Bangkok, and Jack loved Asian women. So he was in heaven, with stopping in Bangkok, and he found out about the drug trade and the heroin, how good it was, and all that sort of stuff. And he met Chai and all, Chai told him that they could work together and all that. So he called, and at this time, Ike was in Spain playing gambling, mm-hmm. And he called up Ike, and he said, "Ike, man," he said, "we've got a thing here. And it's really, really good. And you got to come down here." And at that time, it was the payment system that the military used. And Jack figured out a way to manipulate the currency so that he can make a lot of money without doing anything illegal. And so Ike said, "No," I said, I don't want to come down here. I said, I have a good thing here. Right. And Jack was very insistent. And so finally, Ike just spurred of the moment said, "Okay, I'm coming down." Right. So he came down, and they ended up doing this military payment system, exploiting it, and we're making all kinds of money, like, really, really good. And he could have done this as well, for a long time. And one day, Jack approached Ike. He sat him down. He said, "Look," he says, "I've got a girlfriend, and she's got an uncle who's got a connection to the Golden Triangle." And he said, "Look at these reports." He pulled out some newspaper clippings. He's saying, "There's a big epidemic in the U.S., and there was at that time, especially in Harlem, really bad epidemic." He says, "There's a ready market for this." And again, Ike didn't really want to do it, but then he thought about it, and he said, "Okay, we'll do that." And then that's where Ike took over. He devised this system, where he would use the military transport in order to move the drugs, and then use the postal system, to do that. And from there, the rest was history.
That's yeah, it's unbelievable because this went on for several years too, right?
Yeah. He went on, and nobody knew about it. The military was clueless. It took about 3 or 4 years before they figured out what was going on, and then they started to investigate him. And but still, it was very hard to nail him down on that, and he still managed to operate for several years. The war was winding down about 74, 75. So he wanted to ship as much drugs as he possibly could before the war ended, because that was his key, right? It was the military,
Right.
and personnel and the planes and all that. And there wouldn't be any of that if the war wound down. And so he switched to teak furniture, which meant that he could ship a lot more overseas. And then he got caught, in 1975. What happened was he was sending through the mail heroin to two anonymous women in Goldsboro. And what they would do is the shipment would be made, and then one of his guys would show up and say, "There's been a mistake. This was a wrong shipment," and he'd pick it up. But the two women that he shipped it to freaked out, and one of them contacted the postal service and said, what am I doing receiving this anonymous shipment here? And the other one called the cops.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So what happened was they checked the bag and they found the false bottom underneath, right? And the false bottom, it could hold up to 2 kilos of heroin. And so they figured out, okay, and they traced the shipment back to Bangkok, and then they figured out that it was Ike Atkinson.
Wow.
And so they set a plan, and then they caught him, and that's how he got caught on that.
Now, while in prison, he also tried to arrange another.
Oh yeah, this was later on. This is where it's interesting, because both him and Jesus Ruiz and the guy I did the other book on, both did the same thing. Once they're in prison, they try to revive their network, and both of them did it for the same reason. They needed money when they got out. They were nearing the end of their prison term, and they figured that they would need money when they got out. So they wanted to make this one big deal, and both of them got caught.
Yeah.
On that. And I remember in the book, I described in the book, I had a sense of humor. He's always easygoing, but he says, "Here they came. I'm in a prison cell, and they arrest me and they handcuff me."
Wow.
The guy's in prison and they handcuff him. He thought that was really funny on that sort of stuff. And he would have got out 7 years early, but he got his prison term extended. And then that's where he ended up coming out just when the movie came out.
Wow. Now, the drugs would be transported to 3 spots in the U.S., the National Guard Army in Philadelphia, Monmouth, New Jersey, and the Walter Reed Medical Center in Washington, D.C., right? From there, how many states across the country would the drugs end up?
Well, the drugs were sent to the Air Force Base in Goldsboro. Was one of the ones. He had men on that end, in the Postal Service, especially in the military, that were on his payroll and all that sort of stuff. So he used that. That was probably the major point of entry into the United States. Okay. I don't know about the other 3. Where did you get those 3 from?
There was actually a video on Ike that I watched.
Well, I don't think that's true.
Really?
Yeah, because he had nothing to do with New Jersey. I know for shipping drugs. No, he used North Carolina mainly, as the Seymour Air Force Base was the major point of entry for his drugs.
Okay, well,
that's a big Air Force base. I
stand corrected. Then I apologize.
No, that's okay. I told you there's a lot of misinformation on this subject.
Apparently, okay. So from North Carolina, then how did he ship throughout the country?
Oh, he had contacts all over. I mean, he had contacts in North Carolina. I met some of them when interviewing for the book, and you're a CEO of a major international corporation, a multinational, when you're a drug dealer. People don't realize that. Right. Is how much sophistication and how much thinking and how much work goes in to organize a drug trafficking ring, especially on the scale that Ike was doing. You know, the amount of cocaine that or heroin that he dealt in heroin, and the amount of heroin that he shipped into the U.S. One of the reports estimated that the DEA reports that I saw, it would be like $1.2 billion in today's currency.
Yeah.
You know, so you can imagine, you know, and how many corporations can claim that, you know, multinationals, right? On that,
at the time, it was about 400 million, right?
Yeah, 400, right? 400 million.
And they said
that would be like a billion. That'd be over like a little over a billion today.
Geez.
On that. Then, and so yeah, I mean, you know, he's operating a big corporation.
So basically throughout the country.
Yeah. So it would you know, it would make its way around the country, and you always got people that want to deal, that are willing to deal drugs on that, and it was you know, but invariably, you know, unlike legitimate multinationals, you're dealing with criminality, and you can make mistakes when you're legal, but you can't make mistakes when you're illegal. Right. You know, and I always say that you know, the cops can make all kinds of mistakes when they're doing an investigation, but the criminal can make one mistake.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. You know,
it's going away for a long time,
right? And you see, this is what happened with Jesus. This is what happened with Frank Mathews, who I did a book on, and this is what happened with Ike Atkinson.
Now, what was the real relationship between Frank Lucas and Ike Atkinson?
Yeah, that's funny. On that, Ike had a love-hate relationship with Lucas. You know, he had some really funny stories about him on that. But you know, they actually had a meat farm in Oxford, North Carolina. They went into business. They bought a farm, and yeah. Well, Lucas had this idea that he would open a restaurant in New York, and so they needed the meat, and so they started a farm there, and so yeah, so you know, Ike didn't like Lucas's personality. He thought he was petty. He wasn't really afraid. He wasn't afraid of him. Lucas was a very dangerous guy. I mean, you know, he killed people, and he was unlike Ike. But Ike never really was bothered by that level of violence. And Lucas looked up to Ike, you know, because Ike had the brains. You know, Lucas had the brawn, and so Ike took the lead in their relationship. And as far as the Asian connection, you know, it sounded like Lucas found it himself and developed it himself. It was mainly through Ike that he was able to operate out of Asia. And like I said, Blue Magic was Ike's dope, you know.
So how big of a drug trafficker did Frank Lucas actually become?
Well, you know, you could criticize him all that, but he was a big drug trafficker. But in the movie, you know, he claims he was the biggest drug trafficker in the tri-state area. You know, I remember they make that statement, and you know, he was just one of many guys at that period. You know, Nicky Barnes, right?
Right.
You know, there was a guy named Goldfinger who was really big.
Okay.
Zach Robinson, who was really big. You know, and the drug trade was breaking up, and all these black drug dealers were getting their opportunity, right? And so he was one of many. He was a big guy, you know, but he wasn't the biggest or the most important and all that. He was just one of many.
Now, in the movie, Nicky Barnes and him have a kind of, like you said, a love-hate relationship. Is that? You think that's a fabrication on Lucas's part?
No. Well, you know, they're all from New York, right? They're all New York City, and they all hung out in Harlem, and they all went to the same clubs, so they would bump into each other. I mean, you know, on that sort of thing. But Barnes did not like Lucas, and I don't think Lucas liked Nicky Barnes as well on that then. And Ike tells a funny story where they were in Marion prison, right? He was shipped to Marion prison, and Nicky Barnes was there. And Barnes tried to strike up a relationship with him, and then he found out that Barnes was snitching for the authorities.
Really?
So right. He was trying to set up Ike, you know, for something illegal, so that he could somehow get in better with the authorities, right, on that sort of thing.
Now, I know Nicky Barnes had a relationship with the American Mafia, specifically Crazy Joe Gallo.
Yeah, that's how he got started.
Okay. Was
Yeah,
that
right.
his
In
always
prison,
his?
right. They met Crazy Joe. Crazy Joe had a whole bunch of black drug dealers, which didn't ingratiate him with the mob because the mob was racist
Right.
on that, but he found that useful.
Now, did Frank Lucas and Ike Atkinson appreciate the fact that he had Italian connections, or were they really
I
said
don't think they knew much
something that
about. I don't think they knew much about Nicky Barnes. Outside of meeting him, probably reading about in the newspaper on that. Well, Ike didn't know anything about Frank Mathews. He told me that the first time he heard about Frank Mathews when he was in prison.
really?
Yeah. He said they were talking about this really big drug dealer, legendary guy, and he said that's the first time that he heard of Frank Mathews. He didn't know anything about him,
It
and
seems
like Ike didn't really. Ike would go to New Jersey. He'd visit his sister. He had a sister there on that, but he didn't really operate that much in New York City. He'd come to visit. He would he would cheat at cards. So he would get this equipment that he needed to operate during these big games he was playing. So he'd come there and go to the store and get this equipment on that end. But he didn't really come to New York. He was mainly based in Asia and North Carolina.
wow. It seems like the mid 60s to the mid 70s seems to be the golden era, if you will, of heroin trafficking in the United States.
Well, it was, it's probably bigger now than it's ever been. I mean, it's always, it's grown exponentially, and that sort of stuff. But in terms of colorful characters,
Right.
In terms of really creating an epidemic, yeah, it was really, really an important area. I mean, that's where the drug problem really started. Harlem was just really saturated with drugs. It was unbelievably awful. What's the one, Man Child in a Promised Land, the book? If you read that book, he describes Harlem in the late 50s and how bad it was. It became even worse, when the Vietnam War when the Vietnam War broke out, and these drug dealers had access to all these drugs coming out of Asia.
So now, yeah, it's unbelievable how, like you said, the names are pretty much iconic and legendary. Obviously, we know that there is a drug issue in the States now with fentanyl and heroin.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And even prescription drugs is abused.
Yeah, I mean, you wonder why they're fighting a war on drugs, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, and that's the big issue now. I mean, whether it's demand or supply, and the U.S. is traditionally concentrated on supply. When it's the demand that creates the supply, if you didn't have demand, you wouldn't have supply,
right? Of course.
And that sort of thing. And but they never had the foresight to realize that and change policy.
Yeah, but like you said, we don't have these big names, these legendary characters that are coming forward. The ones that are bringing it in seem to be really keeping a low profile. I'll assume that the majority of it is
until they become too big. You look at Chapo, for example.
Right.
I mean, everybody knows who he is. He's the biggest,
great point.
biggest drug trafficker since Pablo Escobar. In terms of notoriety on that sort of thing. Yeah, that's the problem. You become too big, and that was the problem with Jesus, and that was the problem with Ike. You become too big, and you have more worries, you have more to protect, and like I said, all they had to do was make one mistake. Look what Ike with that postal service, right?
Right.
He had shipping those two shipments to Goldsboro and getting caught.
Now, what was the end of Ike's life like? Because I know he did get out of prison, but
Oh, yeah, it's really interesting. He ended up going back to not Goldsboro, but he ended up living in Raleigh. And to interview him, I would drive down. It'd be about 3.5 hours. I would drive down to Raleigh, and he lived in a small apartment. He was lucky because he had his pensions, or he would have been really
Oh,
hurting.
no.
He might even return to something illegal to make money. But he
Yeah.
had two pensions, which gave him about, I guess, about $25,000 a year. And at that time, this is like 15, 20 years ago, that was enough to survive. He was a man of modest means and all that sort of stuff. Um, he was a legend, and people and former gangsters knew about him. And when I was visiting him, they would show up, at his house, and I would say, "Ike, who's that?" And he goes, "Oh, it's so and so. He used to be a big drug dealer and all that." I said, "Ike, you can't mix with gangs. We can't mix with felons. You know that. You know what I mean? You know what I mean?" Because his parole officer would walk in unannounced. They don't give you. They're not saying I'm going to come at 7 o'clock on a Friday night. They
Right,
just
right,
show
right.
up, right? And I said, if your parole officer shows up one day and when these guys are here, I said, you're cooked. I said, on that, and I think he listened to me because I didn't see after that many, I didn't see anybody after that
Yeah.
on that thing. But when he left prison, he had bladder cancer. And you couldn't really tell it on him because he walked every day. He walked about an hour every day on that sort of stuff. And we ended up, he'd come down, visit me, and we'd talk, and interview. And then we became friends. We just hang out. I'd come down to see him just to see him on that sort of stuff. But then he started to get sick near the end of his life. And he ended up living with a relative. And I remember the last time I talked to him, I called up, and the person that he was staying with said, "Yeah, you could talk to him." I talked to him, and I said, "Ike," and he sounded really weak. And I said, "Ike, I'm going to see you pretty soon, right?" And he didn't say anything, and he sort of mumbled something. And I said, "Well, I'll let you go, Ike." And then he passed a couple of days later
Oh, man.
on that. And yeah, I went down to his funeral in Raleigh, and it was a nice funeral.
Yeah.
And so, anyways, that was like 2015,
Yeah.
and his life was truly amazing. Like I said, he had the opportunities to go legit. He could have been a professional gambler, which was legal,
Right.
and he was making a lot of money, and he could have done that. He didn't have to go. But the thing about Ike, and I found this with a lot of gangsters, they love risk.
Yeah.
They love risk for some reason. Their lives aren't worth living unless there's some risk involved.
Yeah.
And I remember he was asking me one time about what am I doing now? He said, "Who do you research?" I was telling him about this guy, and I was describing, the drug trade, and how this guy was doing it. And you could see his eyes light up.
Right.
And you could see, I was saying to myself, I don't get involved again, because,
Yeah.
but you can see, like, he loved the thought of that, and he took all kinds of risks. That's how he started.
Yeah.
He started by just dumping a duffel bag on a plane and getting on. And that was the way he started off. I mean, it's crazy.
It's almost a high. It is a high.
Yeah. Yeah.
For them,
Yeah.
And it's like any other. The idea of the risk and the return is like any other drug, and it's difficult to get away from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that was funny, but I miss him, because we always had a great time together, and we did the book together. I got to know him on that, and I'm glad we got the book because we got his record down.
Right.
And the book has been optioned for a movie again.
Oh,
so, but you know how hard that is to get something in there. So we're hoping that something happens.
Yeah, we discussed that last time, and man,
Yeah.
I mean it. Well, we should see, but I really hope there's tremendous real stories that could be turned into Hollywood movies, and for some reason they just keep making superhero movies, which baffles me. But whatever.
Oh, that's my pet peeve.
I can't stand them.
I haven't seen Superman versus Spider-Man 6
or
5 or 4.
Right.
And I've asked a couple of friends, I said, that love these movies for some reason. I say, well, what's Superman 4 about? Just to see if they know what the hell they're watching.
Yeah.
They don't know.
It's all the same crap.
Yeah, right. It's all the
It
same crap,
really is.
right?
It's all the
On
same.
that, and I thought they were running out of ideas, and no, they came up with some new ideas. Just come out with a new Superman movie that's supposed to quote be really, really good on that. But it's like film noir. You remember film noir?
Yeah.
It had a period. It ran from like mid 40s to the late 50s, and then ran out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I love film noir. I wish they'd bring it back.
That
On
seems
that.
to
But
be
so I'm hoping that they start making
decent movies again.
people with normal people with normal lives and normal plots.
Yeah, I fully agree.
Yeah.
One more question before I let you go,
Yeah.
sir. Was there ever another person that you researched that you grew close with, like Ike?
Well, I researched Jesus with that, and if you want, I could come back and talk about that in the movie.
Sure.
If you want to do that on that. But yeah, but he's remarkably similar. I mean,
Okay.
incredibly similar. And they both never carried guns, for example. Ike knew how to use a gun. He could disassemble a gun
Right.
because he was a military guy, right? On
Right.
that, but he never carried a gun. He didn't have to.
Right.
And when I was researching the book, I had friends in the DEA that were sources, right? And I told them, I said, Ike's getting out. And they go, oh, Ike Atkinson? I go, yeah, well, you got to put him on the phone. You got to put him on the phone. And so anyways, we were driving along, and I just say, Ike, I said, you want to talk to some of the guys that put you in prison? And he goes, yeah. So I put them on the line, and they were just they want to know what he was doing and all that. And then they say, oh, we're sorry we put you in prison. Ike said, nah. He said, you're doing your job. He said,
Yeah.
no problem.
That seems to be a big angle for criminals. They have a job to do, and so do I, and may the best man win, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And Lucas, I interviewed him twice. I got him through a DA guy.
Okay.
Yeah. Who he stayed in touch with over the years, that put him in prison, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah. So it's not uncommon.
Well, it sounds absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
And the research and the men that you have befriended and have researched are just absolutely amazing. Do you ever go outside your element? This seems to be your expertise. The African American drug dealer during the 60s and 1970s.
Yeah, I'd like to do that because I have some ideas, but I'm considered an expert now on crime. I mean, how I started off with a book, Gangsters of Harlem. I did that.
Yeah,
and then I had a second idea for Black Gangsters of Chicago. I did that. I started getting invited on all these radio shows, TV shows, Black Entertainment, History Channel, all that. And then later I get a reputation. I'm an expert on crime, that sort of stuff. So it's kind of hard to break out of that. When you're doing something that you're successful at, and you're also finding some rewards, from it. So, but I hope to become big enough someday so that I can maybe take a chance and do something else on that. Believe it or not, I like to write a comedy.
Really?
Yeah, I like to write a comedy, a romance, but I would have to learn the craft, because it's screenwriting, but it's still a different thing. And right now,
Mel Brooks is still alive. So
yeah, I just did a script which I've sent off for review.
Really?
On the political thriller, which I'm pretty high on that, but we'll see. We'll see.
Well, best of luck to you, sir. And here's
man.
It's actually called Sgt Smack because that was Ike Atkinson's street name. They call him Sgt Smack. Here's the book. It's a fascinating read. The link for this book will be in the description, so you could just click. It'll take you to Amazon. You can purchase the book, and really a tremendous read. And if you're interested, if you guys saw the last video I did with Ron, the Black Caesar, Frank Mathews, also a tremendous read. This will also, I will also put this in the description. So both of these books you can go and get on Amazon. These are tremendous figures in organized crime and drug trafficking history in the United States. They are both worth reading. Ron, thank you again for coming on. Yeah. It is always a pleasure.
Well, John, you're a great interviewer, and I appreciate coming on your show. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you, sir. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.